It's that time again. Time to revisit the 4Kids dub of Winx Club.
We are the Winx!
We'll be going over episodes 7 and 8 of Season 1 today. As always, if you'd prefer an audio-only format for this series, then check out the It Feels Like Magic podcast. The links will be in the description. Whichever format you prefer, I got you covered. And YouTube intro. Hello, I'm Rosie Vision, and I like to look at entertainment through rose-tinted glasses, because we all deserve some magic in our lives. And what better place to find some magic than Winx Club? Let's go ahead and get into the episodes, shall we?
Watch the dub and open my mind. Believe in 4Kids. Time to unwind. Can it be true? Let's wait and see if 4Kids dub can do everything amazing. Rewatching Winx, come join the fun. Rewatching Winx. Let's have some fun. Rewatching Winx.
The first episode we'll be talking about today is episode 7, Grounded. As per usual, I'm going to give a quick synopsis to get you guys up to speed on what happens so you're not confused when I'm going through all my notes. So, in this episode, the girls are grounded and stuck cleaning while every other student gets to go to a concert. But the Winx find a loophole and call over the specialists to have some fun. After cleaning, of course. Meanwhile, the Tricks decide to get back at the Winx and find the true source of Dragonfire. The Winx and Specialists successfully team up, even without magic, and defeat the Tricks, who are later sent away by Faragonda. Finally, the Winx are able to get their powers back. And that's everything you need to know for this episode, so let's go ahead and dig into some stuff I noticed, things I liked, and also some things I wish hadn't really changed. First off, something that's noticeable throughout the entire 4Kids version of Winx Club is that all the girls are noticeably way sassier than they were originally. Not to say that they weren't in the original Cinnaloom version, and I guess also the Italian, but I feel like it's kind of bumped up to 11 here, including some of the fairies that we don't really associate with that character trait. And in this episode, it's Flora who shines through with that aspect of herself. The first instance of this is when the girls are trying to clean the castle, and Tecna has no idea how to use all this cleaning equipment. And Flora seizes the opportunity and totally messes with her. She lets Tecna use the cleaning equipment incorrectly, on purpose, and tells her, "Good job, sweetie," in a really condescending voice. I was not expecting that, since, for the most part, Flora is an on-brand kind of sweetheart, and just isn't usually that full of sassy remarks, but I'm not exactly complaining. It's new, but not bad. And later on, she's at it yet again. Stella says maybe they should call the boys over to help. And Flora, being the straight thinker in this situation, responds with, "Right, I'm sure they just flip at the prospect of helping us clean." Which, yeah, that's true. Facts. She is correct, but once again, that's something that I kind of expect from another character, like Tecna. A little weird having it come from Flora, but I appreciate this new dimension to her character. It's the nice ones you gotta watch out for. A passing line that I noticed that was kind of funny when we cut back to Cloud Tower is that apparently Headmistress Griffin had planned an event at the same auditorium that Althea has just snagged away, and their event was raising money for monsters, which raises some questions. What exactly are the monsters gonna do with that money? Is it for saving endangered monsters? Because if so, I can respect that, but it's so vague and just such a passing remark that I just don't know what to do with it except have a little laugh. So I'm sharing it with you guys now. Speaking of the witches, I feel like the music that they made for Cloud Tower, the tricks, and just anything to do with the witches is really good. It's definitely more of a traditional take on witches. It really reminds me of something you'd hear in like a children's Halloween special, but that doesn't have to be a bad thing. It still feels like there's an ominous presence to it, but it also is something that just makes me feel a little bit giddy because it takes me back to childhood days. And I just really like the direction that they went for musically for the series, so that's good. Skipping ahead a bit, but still on topic for music. In this episode, when the girls are cleaning and they try to coax the specialist into helping them, they decide to kind of make a game out of it and sing a song. And the original song for this is kind of like an inside joke between me and my sisters, because although I love the Sinloon version to death, it definitely has its weak points, and this song is one of them. It is the strangest and hate to say it, but like worst song that I have ever heard, but I still love it. Originally, the song is just 3 words and 3 words alone, and the melody doesn't even change at all. All it is, it's real easy, I'll teach you. Soap, rinse, dry, and then again. Soap, rinse, dry. The melody is so unappealing. It sounds like something that like a 4 or 5-year-old would make up. It's on par. Well, actually, no, I won't even say that. My younger sister made songs herself around like 5 to 6 years of age that I think had more appeal. I love it to death, but it's still in like ironic kind of love. Whereas the 4Kids version actually has a good cleaning song. It is so much better. So A+ for that. Good job. You improved the original source material. That wasn't difficult, but it's still a good song, so I appreciated that. Unrelated to the 4Kids version, but something I thought I'd point out because it's just hilarious to me, and I always laugh every single time I see it. Winx Club was actually a pretty big, I don't know if you could say pioneer, but they were one of the like early adopters of using CG within a 2D animated show. It was still pretty new at the time, and because it was new technology, it didn't always look the greatest. Scratch that, it never really looked good, but this episode has one of the most notorious examples of that, where the specialists jump out the window and onto their bikes. And for podcast listeners, I'm sorry you don't have a visual. I guess you can just rewatch the episode and look for it. But visual here for the YouTube watchers. Just watch. It's hilarious how bad it looks. I don't fault them at all for it looking that way. They tried, but it's still good for a laugh to watch. There's one more funny line in this episode that I thought I'd bring up. The Tricks end up summoning a monster to fight against the Winx, a Minotaur to be specific. And as the Winx are trying to navigate their way around, as they hear like all these crashing and rumbling sounds, they're understandably nervous. And Flora says that she still feels something unsettling, to which Stella responds, "Could be all the sandwiches you scarfed down." Which, wow, I'm surprised that Stella would call out Flora for eating so much, but it's a funny line in passing. Around this general time, there's also a quick note that's very easily missed that adds to the Winx Club universe that I actually think would be kind of interesting to have in the actual version, which is Tecna notes that Musa has sonar ears, which I think is actually a really fun addition and it totally makes sense. She's the fairy of music and she uses sound waves very often for her source of power. So to be able to have acute hearing senses would fit with that. And I think can make for some really interesting scenarios. Obviously, it does kind of create some plot holes even in this episode since that's not what originally happens, but I think it'd be cool to have. Oh, apparently I lied. There are still some funny lines in this episode. Throughout it, the specialists keep on calling each other bro, which I guess it makes sense, but it feels very weird since that's not what's done originally. And I don't know, it kind of takes me out of it, but in a good way. And then something funny, but also concerning if you think about it too much. This is also around the time that Darcy starts developing feelings, or I guess rather getting a crush on Riven. And when she sees him, she asks Icy if they can take him home. Which, when taken innocently, is just a fun line in passing, but obviously, if you take it literally, kind of concerning. But I guess since they're the tricks, them being up to devious things is on brand for them, so there's that. There's something that was cut in this episode that I'm actually pretty upset that they got rid of. I know why they did it, but it still feels unnecessary. Musa fights against the Minotaur and gets punched and then gets flung across the room. After that, Riven catches her, steps out into the light, and then is noticeably upset at what happened to her and fights the Minotaur head on. And that was cut. Guess it was too violent, apparently. And if it was just this single thing, it wouldn't be that big a deal. But as we'll get into later, I feel like they really didn't do Riven any favors. I can understand if you don't like him as a character, but I think originally they did make it clear that even though he is a jerk, there is like some unresolved stuff that he's going through, and he is trying to change, failing miserably, but he's trying. And I feel like it's harder to see that in the 4Kids version, which is kind of sad. I absolutely love the ending to this episode, though. They kind of turn it into what feels like a much more juvenile show than it should be, but in kind of a funny way. I'll explain. The episode ends with Farragonda, and she's monologuing to herself about the dragon flame because the tricks were just at Althea looking for it. And she says how the dragon flame was right here in this room, but I know that can't be true. Does that mean that someone has it? Who could it be? And I could almost feel the writers just going wink, wink towards the audience to get people thinking when it's very, very obvious who has the dragon flame, and I'd be concerned if Farragonda didn't at least have an idea of which fairy was in the room who could possibly have the dragon flame. But it was still a really funny scene to me, and it gets the younger viewers thinking, I guess. You gotta start somewhere. But it felt kind of Dora the Explorer-y, so yeah, maybe we can bump it up a notch in the future, but it's still funny. And that's all for episode 7. Besides the Riven thing, not too much was actually changed this time around. There were some fun lines. Didn't like it as much as my favorite episode so far, but it was still pretty solid. So let's take a look at the next episode, shall we?
We are the Winx.
The next episode is episode 8, The Day of the Rose. Here's a quick synopsis to catch you guys up. It's the Day of the Rose, a holiday in Magix where people celebrate their parents. so most of the students are away visiting family. Bloom and Stella decide to go to a festival with the specialists to celebrate. And while there's a big race the specialists are competing in. But there's also a lot of tension between Riven and the rest of the gang. The Tricks use this opportunity to further wedge the gap between Riven and the Winxon specialists to get him on their side. Now that we're all on the same page, let's go over some of my thoughts for this episode. First off, I'm really liking WizGiz in this version. I think he is a pretty enjoyable and fun character no matter which version you watch. He's probably my favorite teacher. I'd say Palladium second. I mean, there's not too many teachers that we get to know too well. But WizGiz is still top regardless for me. And they made me like him even more with a line he had in passing in this episode. He is off to go celebrate the Day of the Rose. And apparently in this version of the Winx Club universe, he plans to transform into a basilisk to scare his mom on the Day of the Rose, which I'm assuming she's used to at this point, considering the fact that apparently WizGiz somehow turned his grandpa into a mouse, and he can't change him back. So yeah, just little things here and there that make WizGiz a really fun character. I like it.
What a guy.
Getting a bit more serious though, this is also the episode where we get introduced to some of the family drama between the characters. So, Stella is dealing with divorce on her parents' side, which I'm glad they didn't change, they kept that there. And the other thing that's very important, family related, that I'm glad that they kept in and treated with respect, was the fact that Musa lost her mother. And because of that, this is a very hard day for her. This sequence where we follow Musa and how she deals with the Day of the Rose is handled a little bit differently in this version. First things first, apparently her dad is still a musician, which I think might cause problems later, because originally her dad was a musician, but he gave it up because he felt like music was the reason that they weren't able to take care of Musa's mom when she got ill, which eventually led to her passing. So he gave up on music. And as sad as it is, it makes sense why Musa's father reacted the way that he did. So honestly, I am a little bit worried about the fact that 4Kids decided to cut this out entirely. And not only does it affect how Musa's father reacted to the death of his wife, but it also impacts the tension that Musa and her father have. A big source of conflict between the two of them is that Musa wanted to honor her mother's memory by continuing to pursue music, whereas her father wanted to shy away from it because he felt like that's what took her away from him in the first place. And having Musa's dad still be a musician and touring around, and it seems like they have a good relationship from what we're hearing, kind of messes with that. So I don't know how they address that in the future, but that's something, honestly, I'm a little bit worried about. We also get to see how Musa deals with this particular day, since it reminds her of her mother. She decides to spend it with her, the only way she can, through a holographic image. And this scene was handled a little bit differently in the 4Kids version. I don't think either way is better or worse. It's just a personal choice, really. I felt like it was handled with a more hopeful tone in this version. In this version, she takes her mom's picture to her favorite spot when she was a student at Althea. And she also talks to her mother about how she's been doing, and she also decides to plan a day to spend with her mom, like going to the studio and things like that. Which, in the original, it felt more melancholy. I can't remember exactly how the dialogue went there, but you could definitely see the pain that she was going through. Whereas here, it feels like there is still pain, but this is how she's healing herself and coping with it all. So it's on, in that sense, more of a hopeful note because the most hurtful stage has already passed. But yeah, that was an interesting change. Not sure why they decided to change the tone. Maybe just to make it a little bit lighter since they had younger viewers in mind. But it was still handled with the respect that it deserves, in my opinion. So not too bad a change. However, there was one line in the scene that kind of stood out to me, but not necessarily in a good way. In both versions, she mentions Riven to her mom because that's what's going on in her life. She's interested in someone. And in this version, the way she goes about it made me kind of raise an eyebrow a little bit. She admits how Riven is rough around the edges, which good. That's the truth. We don't want to lie about that. But Musa's thing here is that must just be his way of flirting, right? Which, yeah, I don't think that's the case. And if it were, then I am definitely on team not Riven all the way. If ever there was a question about it before, I'm honestly kind of on the fence with him. I think that if like both Musa and Riven seriously tried to repair the relationship, it could work out. But as it currently stands, it's not worth it with all the problems that both of them have when it comes to communicating. And hearing lines like this made me feel even more iffy about their pairing up. On the topic of boys, a really weird set of dialogue here. I'm not sure what the intention was. Headmistress Griffin is punishing the Tricks because, as happened last episode, they got in trouble with Farragonda for breaking into Althea. And Headmistress Griffin is upset with them not because of what they did, but because they did a poor job of it. And she wants to help them fix it. So she starts trying to plot out a scheme to get back at the Winks. So she thinks to herself, what is the most important thing to them on this day, the day of the rose, a day where we celebrate our parents and how much we love them? And then in her crystal ball or whatever she has, it throws up an image of the specialists. So in her mind, the only thing that could possibly be important to the Winks on this day is boys. Not sure what exactly was trying to be said here, because not only is that kind of ridiculous considering this is essentially like Mother's and Father's Day together, but yeah, they don't even really go anywhere with that premise. I mean, they do take Riven away from the group, but he kind of already was an outcast already. No one was overly pining over him or anything. Musa may have had a crush on him, but it wasn't that serious, so the plan doesn't even make sense. So this line confuses the heck out of me. But anyways, moving on. We get to more stuff that 4Kids had to tone down for audiences, but it was done in a really funny way, honestly. When we get to the races, the Winks are worried that it's gonna be dangerous, which, yes, it is from what we've seen. And Sky, who's once again being disguised as Brandon right now, Sky is trying to convince them that it's perfectly safe. So then we cut to people racing on the track or whatever it is. And someone goes skidding and flying with their bike. But we can't have that in a 4Kids show. No. We can't have kids thinking that they could possibly get hurt. So as that happens, they don't cut it out. What they do instead is they try to mitigate the situation. So they add in dialogue that's not even there in the first place and insert stuff to make it seem like everything's okay. So the driver who's skidding out says, "It's cool, I'm okay, I meant to do that," even though we see him crash and it doesn't look okay. And then on top of that, Sky says the driver just hopped right back up, even though we clearly do not see that happen, which is a very funny case of trying to be network friendly and doing it in a really ham-fisted way. And yeah, I guess we'll be seeing more of that since this is 4Kids we're talking about. Back onto the topic of Riven. This episode is definitely not a shining moment for Riven, no matter which version you watch. Basically, at this point, he's feeling like an outcast, like people are out to get him. And then he's already feeling kind of prickly because everyone is kind of like crushing on each other and flirting around him while he's just trying to figure out life. And to top things off, there's like tension because of the race, and Brandon, who's Sky right now, decides to rub salt into the wound by asking Riven who's cheering for him, which has got to sting a bit because honestly, Riven was probably thinking the same thing. He kind of like outs himself out and lashes out at others before they get a chance to betray him and hurt him. So he probably in the back of his head is thinking, who really is there for me? And then Brandon just shoves that right into his face. And then Riven proceeds to do some really uncool things, which, like I said, this is not a highlight for him in his life. He decides to get back at Sky and Brandon for making him feel like an outsider by trying to worm his way over to Bloom. And as he does so, he tries to pretty much like take ownership of her without her permission and just basically doesn't treat Bloom with the respect that she deserves. And really, no matter what dialogue you put here, it's not going to hide the fact that what Riven's doing is not cool. However, I feel like somehow 4Kids made it feel even worse. I don't know how they did it. When Riven's trying to flirt with Bloom, it feels super creepy. Like, obviously not just the situation itself, because as I already mentioned, no amount of dialogue is gonna fix that. However, it's the performance here that really gets me. It felt more like what would realistically happen, like if someone were doing this in the real world, which was pretty unsettling, and I totally was not expecting that from a 4Kids dub of all things. So that really caught me off guard. And then on top of that, Bloom completely rips Riven a new one here. She does in the original, but in the Cinelume version, although I do like her voice actress and I think she does get better over time, the performance in that version was lacking. There wasn't enough conviction there. Just kind of felt a little bit robotic and emotionless.
Just so you know, I choose who I go out with. And I wouldn't go out with you if you were the last guy on Earth. You're just a ridiculous, arrogant, pathetic windbag. Hey, hands off! Don't be cheeky with me, Riven. You should show people a little more respect.
Whereas here, it was the complete opposite. She completely went off, and I believed it.
What? The only I'd give you is I don't think so. You're a totally conceited, totally cocky, totally boring waste of good oxygen. I'm sorry, but guys like you give guys a bad name, Riven. Ugh, don't you touch me. You know what? I think you need to just cool down, Riven. Still think I'm cute when I'm angry?
And on top of that, she even mentions how she can't understand how Musa could possibly have a crush on him. Her emotions are way more believable here, and it just makes for a way more impacting scene in general. However, I'm not completely happy with how this whole thing panned out, because although I do think that they handled the Riven thing more realistically, and also the fact that Bloom rightfully defended herself and it actually felt believable, I felt like they kind of are making Riven out to be like a completely unfeeling, cold jerk and a monster. Which, yes, that is part of his character, but it's not the whole thing. That doesn't excuse his actions, but we can at least try to understand where he's coming from originally, whereas I don't feel that as much here, which just makes us think, why the heck does Musa even like him? Especially considering they also cut the part where he saves her in the previous episode. So literally, she has no reason to like Riven at all in this version. Another thing that they cut that I felt like kind of showed that this wasn't quite so black and white of a situation is originally Bloom immediately regrets snapping at Riven because she realizes that even though he was totally in the wrong, she got really, really personal and humiliated him in front of everyone. The person who's already insecure because he feels like he's an outcast. And that wasn't the case here. She does say that she feels bad later, but originally she feels bad almost instantly, and that's cut here, which I thought shouldn't be the case, honestly. I have mixed feelings with how they dealt with this. I am glad that they at least kept the part where Riven storms off and kind of has like a breakdown thinking that he doesn't need anyone and really showing how he just closes people off more and more. That was good, but like I said before, they're really making him out to be a heartless monster and a jerk that no one would want to be around, which, although that was probably the case, I'd say like maybe 80% of the time, there was still a good 20% of the time when he was very humane. It obviously gets better as the series go on for a time, but yeah, even though he's at his worst in season 1 because he has that whole arc, I feel like 4Kids is taking it too far, personally. But some positivity. There's a point where the tricks transform Nut to look like Timmy to trick Bloom into giving something to Riven. And I feel like the VA for Timmy did a really good job. He was obviously playing the part of Nut, but by using his Timmy voice. And I felt like there wasn't enough of an impact originally with the Cinelume version. It just felt like Timmy, just like slightly off. Whereas this voice actor like just sounds like a complete nervous wreck, which makes way more sense since it's Nut trying to get this plan together formed by the tricks. And it was just endearing. Did a really good job. So there's some positivity. But apparently I forgot something about the whole Riven debacle that I'm kind of upset about. When Bloom goes to apologize to him and to give him the gift that was given to her by Timmy, who was really Nut in disguise, the way that Riven reacts in this version makes him really, really unlikable. He does say thank you, but it's extremely rushed. The performance overall for this scene just sounds really heartless and mean. And I felt like there wasn't any meaningful dialogue between the two whatsoever. You can still see the points that animators were trying to show where Riven actually cares and that he feels touched that Bloom actually went out of her way to try to apologize. You can still see those little frames, but I feel like it means nothing with the way that the scene was handled here, which is a shame because I actually really like Riven's arc for the season. It's a shame that they didn't handle his character properly from here on out because he definitely starts as a jerk, but like I said, he kind of cuts himself off from other people but still wants to cling on to them, but he's afraid. So that's why he's constantly insulting people and things like that. And this scene, I felt, well, actually, this episode is where I really feel like we start to understand where he's coming from, and we see that he actually does want to make meaningful connections. He is jealous of the others for being able to connect with each other so easily, and he wants to be accepted. But then he feels completely betrayed and backstabbed because of what happens at the end of the episode, where the tricks completely ruin his chances of winning the competition and frame Bloom in the process. So he completely gives up on the idea of trying to reach out to others and be friendly. And he kind of just spirals and spirals from there, hating himself for the decision that he made, until finally he realizes that he was used and that he wants to change. And he helps out the forces of good and manages to be a hero at the end of the day, which was a really good arc for his character that I really liked. And like I said, it's a shame that it was ruined seasons onward, but I feel like it won't be as earned in the 4Kids version because, like I said, I have a soft spot for Riven. I do think that some of his actions are absolutely unacceptable. And like I said, don't think that he and Misa are a good match unless they like really, really team up and work together, or like even take a break but then try to maybe figure things out once they're in better places. But I don't expect that with Rainbow, honestly. So it's probably better just not to have it happen at all, or just be an example of a relationship that didn't work, because that's good to know too. He just feels so unlikable, and I just can't wrap my head on why Misa likes him in this version. There was at least something to cling on to originally, but I'm not seeing that here, which is a real shame. But let's end things out on a positive note. During the race, we get another original 4Kids song, and it's, I don't know if this is the title, but I'm just gonna call it the Mean Girls song. I'm sure this is a lot of people's favorites, and I can understand why. It is a total pop. The lyrics are cheesy, and it's kind of campy, but the enthusiasm is there, and I absolutely love it. It was the best part of this episode by far, and I am definitely going to be listening to it in the future. So that's definitely a good point. And I think it's about time to start wrapping up. So far, I've really been enjoying revisiting this version of Winx. It's pretty fun. There's some really catchy songs, and a lot of the voice cast is starting to grow on me. There were some things I was upset about being cut this time around, but part of it was because 4Kids was trying so hard to be network friendly, so it would be a bit unfair to put all the blame on them alone, but still. Regardless, I am still looking forward to the next bunch of episodes. Next time we'll be going over episodes 9 and 10 of Season 1, Spelled and Magical Reality Check. So stay tuned, and don't forget to keep a little bit of magic in your lives.